There is a rule of the ocean that is older than sailing itself. It is a rule written in the chemistry of our blood and the salt of the sea. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. We all know it, we all repeat it. But until you have been drifting under a relentless sun for days, until your tongue has swollen to the size of a tennis ball, until your throat feels like it is filled with broken glass, you do not understand the temptation. The ocean looks like water, it moves like water, it sparkles like water. Your brain, screaming for hydration, tells you just one sip, it can't hurt, it looks so cool, it looks so refreshing. But that sip is a trap. Because seawater doesn't just kill you physically, it doesn't just shut down your kidneys. It destroys your mind. It causes rapid brain swelling. It triggers vivid, terrifying hallucinations. It induces paranoia. It turns a rational human being into a raving lunatic in a matter of hours. In October 1982, 5 people were adrift in a tiny rubber dinghy in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. They were tired, they were hungry, they were terrified. But they were alive. Then 2 of them broke the rule. They couldn't take the thirst anymore. They leaned over the side, they cupped their hands, they drank the ocean. And within hours, the life raft didn't look like a life raft anymore. To them, it looked like a car. It looked like a 7-Eleven. It looked like a party. They stood up. They said they were going to the store to buy cigarettes. And they stepped out of the boat, directly into a sea that was swarming with hundreds of tiger sharks. This is the story of the *Trashman yacht disaster. It is not just a survival story. It is a psychological horror story. It is a story about what happens when the mind breaks before the body, and how the scariest monsters in the ocean aren't the sharks, but the people sitting next to you who have lost their grip on reality. If you are fascinated by the fragility of the human mind and the brutal reality of maritime disasters, please hit that subscribe ** button right now. You need to hear this story because it serves as a chilling reminder. The ocean is a desert, and the water is poison. To understand the chaos, we have to look at the crew. It was 1982. A 58-foot sailing yacht named the *Trashman, an ominous name, in hindsight was docked in Maine. It was destined for Florida. The owner was a man named John Lipoth. He was 29. He was a good sailor, but he was known for being a bit loose. He liked to party. He liked to drink. He needed a crew to help him sail the boat down the coast. He hired his girlfriend, Meg Mooney. He hired a young British sailor named Mark Adams. He hired a calm, experienced diver named Brad Kavanagh. And he hired a 24-year-old sailor named Deborah Kiley. Deborah Kiley was the one who saw the red flags. From the moment she stepped on board, she felt something was wrong. The boat was beautiful, but the vibe was chaotic. John and Mark spent most of the time drinking. They weren't checking the rigging. They weren't checking the safety gear. They were treating the Atlantic Ocean like a highway. Deborah thought about quitting. She called her father. "I don't feel good about this," she said. But she needed the money. She needed the sea time. So against her gut instinct, she untied the lines. The Trashman set sail. For the first few days, the tension was high. John and Mark were often hungover. The weather was getting rough. And then they hit the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is a powerful current of warm water. When a cold storm from the north hits the warm current from the south, it creates a washing machine effect. Waves don't just get big, they get vertical. A massive storm hit the *Trashman *. Winds clocked at 60 knots, 70 mph. Waves reached 50 feet. The boat was being tossed like a toy. John, the captain, was struggling to steer. He was exhausted. He had been drinking. The crew was terrified. They took shifts at the wheel, tied on with safety harnesses, while mountains of black water crashed over them. Then the unthinkable happened. A wave smashed the windows of the salon. Water poured in. Then another wave hit the side. The rigging snapped, the mast shuddered. The boat began to groan. The hull was compromised. "We're sinking," someone screamed. It wasn't a slow leak. The trashman was going down fast. "Get the raft." They had an 11-foot, inflatable Zodiac dinghy. They threw it into the raging ocean. They didn't have time to grab supplies. No water, no food, no flares, no radio. They just jumped. 5 people piled into a tiny rubber boat in the middle of a hurricane. And as they drifted away, they watched the asterisk trashman tip upward and disappear beneath the waves. It took everything they owned with it. They were left with the clothes on their backs and the terror in their hearts. The storm raged for another 24 hours. The 5 survivors huddled together in the raft. They were cold, they were wet. But one of them was in agony. Meg Mooney, John's girlfriend, had been injured during the escape. Her leg had gotten tangled in the rigging. She had deep, open lacerations on her shins and ankles. In the saltwater, the wounds were screaming. But worse than the pain was the smell. Blood. Blood in the water is a signal. The storm eventually passed. The sun came out. The ocean became calm. But the calmness revealed what the storm had been hiding. Fins. Shark fins. Not just 1 or 2, a school. Great whites, tigers, makos, it didn't matter, they were predators. They started bumping the bottom of the raft. They could smell Meg's blood leaking into the water. They were testing the rubber, waiting for it to pop. Days passed. The sun became their enemy. They had no roof. They were exposed to UV rays reflecting off the water. They were baking. But the thirst was the real torture. Thirst is not just dry mouth. It is a biological panic. By day 3, the conversation stopped. Their tongues swelled. Their lips cracked and bled. Deborah Kiley and Brad Kavanaugh, the diver, made a pact. They huddled together. "We do not drink the water," Brad whispered, "no matter what." "I promise," Deborah said. They knew the science. They knew it meant death. But John Lipoth and Mark Adams were breaking. John was the captain. He felt the guilt of sinking his boat. He was also going through alcohol withdrawal. Mark was young and impulsive. They started staring at the water. "It's not that salty," Mark mumbled. "I'll just take a little sip." "Don't do it," Brad yelled. "But you can't stop a grown man." Mark leaned over. He scooped up a handful of the Atlantic. He drank it. John watched him. "Is it okay?" "It's fine," Mark said. "It's cold." John drank too. And the clock started ticking. It takes a few hours for the sodium to attack the brain. It draws water out of the cells. The brain shrinks and pulls away from the skull, tearing blood vessels, or it swells. The result is psychosis. Suddenly, John sat up. His eyes were wild. He looked around the empty horizon. "I see land," he said. There was no land. "Look," John pointed at nothing. "There are cars. I see a parking lot." Deborah tried to calm him down. "John, there is no parking lot. We are in the ocean." "No," John shouted. "You're lying. I can see the lights." Then Mark started. Mark looked at the bottom of the raft. "We're in a car," Mark said. "We're in a taxi." He started talking to invisible people. He was laughing. It was terrifying for Deborah and Brad. They were trapped in a coffin-sized boat with two men who had completely detached from reality. The men weren't just confused, they were agitated. They started rocking the boat. "Stop," Brad yelled. "You'll flip us." The sharks were still circling. They could feel the bumps. Day 4. The hallucinations took a deadly turn. John looked at the horizon. He stood up. The boat wobbled dangerously. "I'm going to get the car," John said calmly. "I need to buy cigarettes. Does anyone want anything?" He spoke as if he were standing in a living room. "John, sit down," Deborah screamed. "I'll be right back," John said. And with a casual step, he walked off the side of the raft. He splashed into the water. He started swimming toward the 7-Eleven he saw in his mind. "Wait," Deborah screamed. But then the water boiled. John screamed. It wasn't a hallucination anymore. "Shark, shark." The water turned red. John was pulled under. Then he popped back up, screaming for help. Then he was pulled under again. The sharks tore him apart just yards from the raft. The survivors sat in silence, listening to the splashing until it stopped. John was gone. He had died chasing a phantom pack of cigarettes. You would think seeing John get eaten would snap Mark out of it. But saltwater psychosis doesn't work that way. Mark was too far gone. He looked at the water where John died. He didn't see sharks, he saw friends. "John's down there," Mark said. "He's cooling off." Mark started to get violent. He claimed that Deborah and Brad were hiding water from him. He claimed the raft was a vampire. He tried to attack Brad. Brad was weak, but he had to fight him off. They were fighting for their lives inside a rubber ring, surrounded by blood-crazed sharks. Then Mark made his move. "I'm hot," Mark said. "I'm going to join John." He sat on the edge of the raft. He dipped his hands in the water. He slid off. Immediately, the sharks were there. It was a feeding frenzy. The sharks were bumping the raft so hard that Deborah and Brad were knocked into the air. They clung to the ropes, sobbing, closing their eyes, trying to block out the sound of Mark being consumed. Within minutes, Mark was gone. Now there were 3. Deborah, Brad, and Meg. But Meg wasn't hallucinating. She was dying of sepsis. Her wounds had turned black. The infection had spread to her blood. She was delirious with fever. She lay in the bottom of the raft, in the mixture of salt water and urine. She whispered, "I'm tired. I'm so tired." Deborah held her hand. "You have to stay awake, Meg." But Meg couldn't. On day 5, she took a breath, rattled, and stopped. She was dead. Now Deborah and Brad faced the ultimate horror. They were alone with a corpse. And the corpse was fresh meat. The sharks knew it. They became more aggressive. They were nudging the raft, lifting it out of the water. Brad looked at Deborah. "We can't keep her," he said. "We can't just throw her in," Deborah cried. "She's our friend. If we keep her, the sharks will flip us to get to her, or she will rot and kill us with disease." They had to do it. They stripped Meg of her clothes. They needed the clothes for warmth. They said a prayer, "The Lord is my shepherd." And they pushed Meg's body overboard. They didn't watch, they turned away. But they heard it. The sharks took her almost instantly. The frenzy was so violent the raft spun in circles. Now there were 2. Deborah Kiley and Brad Kavanaugh. They were the only ones who hadn't drunk the water. They were the only ones sane. But they were barely alive. They were covered in saltwater boils. Their skin was peeling. They were skeletons. They huddled together in the empty, blood-stained raft. They made a pact. "We don't sleep," Brad said. "If we sleep, we die. We have to watch each other." They pinched each other. They told stories. They talked about food. They talked about what they would eat when they got home: ice cream, steak, cold soda. They focused on the future to block out the present. They saw ships. A massive freighter passed within a mile. They waved their shirts. They screamed. The freighter kept going. This is the moment that breaks most people. But Deborah got angry. "I am not dying here," she screamed at the ocean. "I refuse." Day 6. Deborah and Brad were fatting. They were drifting in and out of consciousness. Deborah looked up. She saw a ship. It wasn't passing, it was close. It was a Soviet cargo ship, the Olenegorsk Asterisk. The sailors were on deck. They were pointing. They had seen the tiny yellow raft. The ship blew its horn. Deborah and Brad collapsed into each other's arms. The ship lowered a boat. Russian sailors jumped out. They pulled the 2 Americans from the raft. They wrapped them in blankets. They gave them water, fresh, sweet water. When they got on board, the Russians were confused. "Where are the others?" they asked. Deborah pointed at the ocean. "Gone," she whispered, "all gone." Deborah and Brad survived. But the trauma followed them. Deborah Kiley spent years dealing with survivor's guilt. Why did she live? Why did John and Mark die? She realized the difference was one decision, one sip. She became a motivational speaker and an author. She wrote Albatross Asterisk, a book about the disaster. She dedicated her life to teaching people about the dangers of the ocean and the power of the mind. She famously said, "The ocean didn't kill them. Their own minds killed them. The water was just the weapon." Brad Kavanaugh also survived and went on to live a quiet life. They remained friends, bonded by the horror they witnessed. They were the only witnesses to the 7/11 in the Atlantic. The story of the Asterisk Trashman is unique because it is a perfect controlled experiment. 5 people, same boat, same conditions. 2 drank water, 3 didn't. The 2 who drank died in the most horrific way possible. The 3 who didn't, died of injury, kept their sanity. It is a terrifying lesson in biology. We like to think we are in control of our minds. We think, "I would never jump into shark water." But change the chemical balance of your blood just a tiny bit, and suddenly, jumping into shark water seems like the most logical thing in the world. It's scary because it shows how thin the line is between sanity and madness. Conclusion: the next time you are at the beach and you get a mouthful of salt water and you spit it out because it tastes bad, remember John and Mark. Remember that the taste is a warning signal. A signal from millions of years of evolution telling you, "Stop, this is not for you." John and Mark ignored the signal, and they paid the ultimate price. They found their 7-Eleven, but the cost of the cigarettes was their lives. This story actually gives me chills. The idea of him saying, "I'm going to get the car," while in the middle of the ocean is just haunting. Do you think you would have the discipline to not drink the water after 4 days? Let me know in the comments below. If you are terrified by the psychology of survival, please hit that asterisk button. And subscribe ***. I have a story coming next week about a man who was lost in the jungle for 3 weeks and had to pull worms out of his own skin to survive. Stay safe, stay hydrated with fresh water, and respect the rules of the sea.